Video games are a source of joy for a lot of people. Whether it's the lighthearted characters and jokes, or even a fun and engaging gameplay loop, it's no surprise that millions of people flock to video games. However, this video isn't about the happy moments in games, but sometimes games can also make the player feel and pull at the heartstrings. And that's what this video is going to focus on today. And with that being said, here are 5 of some of the saddest moments in video games. I'll go ahead and say the spoiler alert now for Dark Souls 1, Red Dead Redemption 2, Telltale's The Walking Dead Season 1, The Last of Us, and Kingdom Come Deliverance. And up at number 1, as previously mentioned, is Dark Souls 1 with Great Wolf Sif. Great Wolf Sif is an essential boss fight from Dark Souls 1. A giant wolf with a sword, and a lot of memes have spawned from this fight. Anytime someone puts a boss health bar over a dog carrying a stick, it's mostly referencing this. The somber soundtrack is also iconic at this point as one of the number 1 Dark Souls songs, but now that you know exactly what I'm talking about, let's talk about why I think it's sad. First off, once you get Sif below 25% health, he will start limping around. Something that not a lot of players actually see because they're killing him fairly quickly, because the fight actually gets easier as you defeat him, as he gets slower and more sluggish in that last 25%. He's also not super hard either, he's essential, and the main reason he's fighting you is so you don't end up like his master, the Knight Artorias, another infamous boss from Dark Souls 1, but the DLC, and you pretty much need Artorias' ring to go into the Abyss. Now this scene actually is even more sad if you play the DLC first. It's possible to run into Sif once before your fight with him in the main game story. In that time you'll actually be able to free Sif, and he or she, it's unconfirmed which, but the name scheme kind of leads towards she, will help you with a boss fight in the DLC. Now if you've done all this in advance, and when you actually get there for the main story, and you go to face Sif, the Great Wolf will recognize your scent and actually be reluctant to fight you. Up next, I promise not to take as long with this one, is the horse scene from Red Dead Redemption 2. More specifically, what I'm talking about is a scene towards the climax of Arthur Morgan's story, where he and John Marston are trying to escape the Pinkertons, as well as Micah, when Arthur is launched from the horse, and it seems that the horse has sustained fatal injuries. What makes it even more sad is Arthur takes the time, even though John's urging him on, to say thank you to the horse. Now, if you're like me, you spent your whole game with a horse from pretty early on in the game, maybe made 1 or 2 different upgrades throughout earlier on, but I stuck with the same horse throughout this incredibly long game. So to me especially, this scene hit really hard, and I'm sure I'm not alone in this feeling. The little music notes that ramp up with it, along with everything that's going on around, the gunshots and everything, it really does just feel like another loss in Arthur's story. Up at number 3, we have the ending to Telltale's The Walking Dead Season 1. More specifically, Lee's death. Throughout the game, you're playing as Lee Everett, protecting a young girl he finds during the early hours of the apocalypse from the horrors and freak shows of the world. While Lee is occasionally a flawed man with a lot of tough decisions to make, ultimately he always does right by Clementine. In the final scene of the game, after Lee has been bitten and is terminally ill from the zombie bite, you are then playing as Clementine. And it's in that final scene where Lee is unable to move, where he instructs Clementine to restrain him. As a final wish, he asks Clementine to end his life. Now this game doesn't shy away from subject matters such as suicide or things like that, but the idea of thrusting such a heavy decision and weight onto a very young girl is something that the Telltale Walking Dead games never quite lived up to later on. This was probably the heaviest decision once you think of the implications, and in the end, it's a very easy decision to make as the player. Of course, most people do in fact kill Lee, but there is the option to just leave, in which case he will eventually turn, although handcuffed. Either way though, this is the end of Lee's story and the end of his time with Clementine. Up at number 4, we have one of the best games of all time, and that is The Last of Us. It's another zombie game, but this time it's a little bit of a different approach. This time it's not the zombies that are actually causing the problems. This time it's the people. And I'll go ahead and say this now, this is a 2 for 1. I actually have 2 scenes from The Last of Us that I think are actually pretty impactful and sad. The first scene I had in mind was actually the opening scene. You'll know this scene if you've ever been on the internet ever, and it's the one in which Joel, the main character, loses his daughter. Sets up the events of the entire game and the emotional tone, but what's really great about this scene is actually both the acting as well as the direction. There's the very well-known story out there that this scene was shot very many times and that the director, Neil Druckmann, just was never quite satisfied with it, and Troy Baker, the actor for Joel, really had to put everything he had into this scene emotionally. I believe saying something along the lines that it was the hardest scene to do. And you really do feel that, and it really does set the emotional undertones for the rest of the game. Now, you might be wondering what the second scene that I could have chosen for this game is, and there are plenty. There are plenty of nice, happy moments in this game, little quick jokes, sure. But most of this game is very sad. The other scene I had in mind is actually at Tommy's Once Joel is trying to basically pawn off Ellie as a responsibility onto his brother Tommy, Ellie seems to overhear this or get wind of what's going on, and she makes a mad dash out of the place on a horse. After eventually tracking her down and ending up at a ranch house, Joel and Ellie have a really nice scene together. In this scene, Joel warns that Ellie will be better off with Tommy. He knows more about the Fireflies and overall the mission as to what to do. He has better resources. He says that he trusts Tommy more than himself. Ellie, however, doesn't like this, and a very emotional performance from Ashley Johnson really sells that Ellie is tired of being tossed around from person to person, other people taking care of her all the time, and mainly everyone dying. But she didn't want that anymore. She wanted to be with Joel because she had grown comfortable with him over their journey across the country. Ultimately, this scene works out in the end, for Joel does, in fact, take up the responsibility, and the rest is history. But at the time, it was a very sad and heartbreaking scene to basically watch a 14-year-old girl plead for a father figure not to leave her. Coming in at number 5, we have The Loss of Your Parents in Kingdom Come Deliverance. You play as Henry, and you get to know your dad, the blacksmith, as well as your mother, throughout the tutorial of the game where you go around the town of Skalitz. All things are happy-go-lucky, you throw shit at someone's house, you beat up a guy, and overall you just meet some really interesting characters here. Well, it's pretty short-lived, as eventually the humans come to invade, and the town of Skalitz isn't prepared for that type of onslaught. A full-on army basically versus a small village, with an actually well-defended castle behind it. And as you can guess, Henry does survive this as being the tutorial of the game. However, emotional motivations need to be set, so Henry loses both his mother and father. His father dies defending his mother, and Henry gets to see basically all of this happen. Now, this being an RPG, you spend a lot of time after this in the game. However, this scene really does resonate with Henry, and it does make you feel bad as the player. It's a sad scene to watch, knowing how interesting of a character especially the father was, and you'll learn even more about him throughout the course of the game. But at the very end of the game, you are treated to a quick little dream sequence where, in fact, Henry is reunited with his parents. So there you have it. Here are 5 of my sad moments in video games. If there's any that I missed, or any that you'd like to add, I haven't played all games, believe it or not. I'm not that cool. Go ahead and comment them down below, and maybe I'll make a second video. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. If you don't mind, please consider subscribing if you're coming across this video for the first time. And if you are subscribed, maybe consider sharing this video. It helps a lot. And anyway, thank you all so much for watching. Goodbye.